The 9,548th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Hans Grundberg, Special Envoy of the Secretary-General for Yemen, and Ms. Edem Wasernu, Director of Operations and Advocacy, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Hans Grundberg.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, allow me to state the obvious. We meet at a particularly challenging time for Yemen and for the region. Until recently, we were making steady progress in our mediation, and for almost 2 years, relative calm has prevailed along the front lines, and key actors continued negotiations toward ending the conflict in Yemen. In late December 2023, the parties committed to me to a nationwide ceasefire, measures to improve living conditions, and restarting an intra-Yemeni political process. They also committed to work with my office to operationalize these commitments through a UN roadmap agreement. I am grateful for the roles of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman in supporting the UN mediation. However, the locus of attention has since shifted. The mediation landscape is now undeniably much more complex, and efforts to reach an agreement are being buffeted by different priorities and interests. Rising regional tensions linked to the war in Gaza, and in particular the military escalation in the Red Sea, are slowing down the pace of the peace efforts in Yemen. As much as I have tried to insulate the peace process from wider regional dynamics, the reality is that mediation efforts in Yemen cannot be neatly cordoned off. What happens regionally impacts Yemen, and what happens in Yemen can impact the region. In response to Ansar Allah's repeated attacks on vessels in the Red Sea, the United States and the United Kingdom have struck weapons storage facilities, missile systems, and other targets in Ansar Allah-controlled areas in Yemen. And in the coming days, also in response to Ansar Allah's military actions in the Red Sea, the United States is expected to designate Ansar Allah a specially designated terrorist group. Let me be frank, these developments are concerning. Despite potential complications, my work will continue no matter what. It is therefore imperative that we protect the political space, that communication channels are kept open, and that all actors remain actively engaged with my efforts. While the spotlight is on the Red Sea, I also want to draw your attention to worrying developments inside Yemen. There is a sense of foreboding along several front lines, with reports of clashes, mobilizations, and casualties, including in Shabwa, Al-Jawf, Ma'rib, Sada, and Taiz. I'm also concerned about the growing din of public threats to return to fighting. Meanwhile, the scale of economic challenges across the country is simply staggering. Civil servants, especially in Ansar Allah-controlled areas, have not been paid their salaries in full, and people in government-controlled areas face extended power outages and rising prices as a result of currency depreciation. In the past week, I have visited Aden, Mocha, and Taiz. I have listened to Yemeni's concerns, particularly those related to the need to open roads and improve living conditions, and I have heard their hopes for the future. I have also consistently signaled the importance of maintaining calm on the front lines and protecting progress made so far. Madam President, Although the path to peace now faces more challenges, my mediation approach is flexible enough to adapt to different scenarios and challenges. In addition to Yemen, I have traveled extensively in the region in the past weeks, including to Iran, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. My discussions have focused on the need for a conducive environment for resolving the conflict in Yemen. Amid today's shifting sands, I see that three things need to happen in the immediate term to create an off-ramp to this dangerous escalatory cycle. First, we need to see regional de-escalation. The United Nations is engaging with relevant stakeholders to encourage the prioritization of diplomatic channels to this end. The United Nations Secretary General has called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza and has warned he is gravely concerned about the further spillover of this conflict. I reiterate his call, and I am engaging the Yemeni parties and relevant regional actors to support de-escalation in the Red Sea to protect the mediation space in Yemen. Second, the Yemeni parties must stop public provocations and refrain from military opportunism inside Yemen at this delicate juncture. Escalation in Yemen is a choice. Making that choice comes with a price that will be paid by the Yemenis in even greater loss of lives and livelihoods. The parties must avoid all actions that risk this outcome. And I am encouraged, Madam President, that in my latest exchanges, I have received assurances that all parties prefer the path to peace. Third, and because Yemen is not a footnote to a wider regional story, the parties need to refocus on safeguarding the progress that has been made thus far toward reaching an agreement. The regional escalation does not negate the urgent needs in Yemen for a nationwide ceasefire, paying public sector salaries, resuming oil exports, opening roads, ports and airports, reconstruction, and other elements that have been under negotiation. The parties still need to engage in sustainable dialogue structures under UN auspices to achieve these measures and address other priorities. My office has been engaging the parties on the details of a ceasefire mechanism that would bring them together, building off the military coordination committee established during the truce. And we continue to prepare for the creation of a joint economic committee facilitated by the United Nations to support the implementation of agreed economic measures and to negotiate other short and long-term priorities. Ultimately, peace is a political project, so the backbone of all of this must be a credible, internationally supported, intra-Yemeni political process. Through this process, Yemenis will decide how durably end the war and to build a new political future. Madam President, there is no reason Yemenis should be condemned to conditions of war, poverty, and repression. The United Nations roadmap under discussion presents an alternative future. Instead of the zero-sum mindset of war and extraction, the parties can cooperate to generate transformative benefits for all Yemenis. For example, a durable nationwide ceasefire would save lives and allow for the revival of economic life. Opening roads and removing double taxation would enhance civilian safety and lower prices of essential goods. Resuming oil and gas production and export would generate significant finance flows, enabling civil servant salary payments and public service delivery. All of this would mean Yemenis have a better access to health, education, and other essential needs and services. In peacetime, international donors could support rebuilding houses and infrastructure and developing sectors such as renewable energy developing sectors such as renewable energy. Foreign direct investment could help Yemen move from aid dependency to investment-driven post-conflict reconstruction. Yemen would have greater access to grants and lending from international financial institutions. More internally displaced persons could return home. And crucially, a political settlement should ensure that Yemenis can participate safely and freely in civil and political life. It should also ensure state institutions are accountable to the priorities and needs of Yemenis. Madam President, Yemenis deserve nothing less. We've seen successful peace processes in other contexts unlock many of these gains, and in Yemen there is a compelling alternative to the path of conflict and economic ruin. We are working toward an agreement that allows the parties to come together, negotiate political, economic, and military security priorities, and make a difference to the lives of the Yemeni people. This is a pathway to shared and common recovery. Everyone in this council wields influence. What you say and what you do matters, and Yemen deserves your full attention. Although your vantage points vary, you have a collective responsibility to protect the mediation space and ensure Yemenis have a real chance at peace. I will continue to rely on your concerted support. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Grundberg for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Ms. Edem Wasernu.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to Hans for his update. Whilst Yemen's terrible conflict and associated human suffering has dragged on for over 9 years, we must maintain hope for a political solution. However, people in Yemen are watching with alarm as a crisis spreading across the region brings with it the risk of renewed violence. This is a cause for concern for the people in Yemen and the humanitarian community serving them. In these uncertain times, we are thankful that Julian Hernis has assumed his new role as the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen. He has Under Secretary General Martin Griffiths' full support in fulfilling his essential duties. Further, of course, allow me to thank Peter Hawkins of UNICEF for serving as the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator ad interim, as well as indeed the previous Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, David Gressley, for all his work. Madam President, members of the Council, last year, some progress was made in mitigating the humanitarian situation, an indication of the positive impacts of the UN-brokered truce, the subsequent cessation of hostilities, and the humanitarian response. However, the humanitarian appeal for 2024, we and our partners released 2 weeks ago, paints a picture of massive continuing humanitarian needs. For example, in 2024, over 18 million people, that is over half the population of Yemen, will need humanitarian assistance and protection in Yemen, protection services. We anticipate that 17.6 million people will be severely food insecure. An estimated 2.7 million women and children, 5 million children under 5 will need treatment for acute malnutrition. The situation will unfortunately continue to deteriorate without urgent and sufficient attention. Madam President, in 2023, we received just 40% of the total funding needed under the humanitarian plan. We received 1.72 billion of the 4.3 billion US dollars requested. We are truly grateful for donor support and the contributions to the humanitarian response and indeed for the people of Yemen. This year, our response is more targeted and even more prioritized. Our plan has been informed by area-based consultations with local authorities, humanitarian and development actors, and most importantly, the people we serve, the affected people of Yemen. It is better aligned also to some of the development efforts underway. As a result, this year's humanitarian appeal requires 2.7 billion to reach 11.2 million people across Yemen. We've gone down from 4.3 billion ask to $2.7 billion. As a matter of priority, we urge the international community to augment its efforts to ensure that the World Food Programme and its partners have the resources necessary to urgently resume food distribution in Houthi-controlled areas and initiate a retargeted and registration exercise. Without sufficient resources, we may see a sharp deterioration of the food security situation in some areas in the coming months. 2.4 million children and 900,000 women will face an elevated risk of morbidity and mortality due to the malnutrition-related complications. Additionally, in parallel, fully funding the United Nations Development Framework, estimated at $1.3 billion, should be a priority to see a transition towards more sustainable solutions. Madam President, as we briefed last month, we are watching closely to assess the impact of the hostilities in the Red Sea on the humanitarian situation and on our humanitarian operations. We are receiving reports that transport costs to Hodeidah and Aden ports have significantly increased since November due to the ongoing hostilities. The World Food Programme has reported increases of up to 110% for containerized shipments to Yemen. Other humanitarian organizations have seen freight rate increase of up to 318%. While the humanitarian community is also concerned about any potential adverse effects of the recent designation of the Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist, we note that general licenses are designed to safeguard many transactions necessary for our humanitarian activities and essential commercial imports. Nevertheless, we fear there may be an effect, of course, on the economy, including commercial imports of essential items on which the people of Yemen, depend on more than ever. Humanitarian aid cannot make up for the gaps in the supply of commercial goods. Such effects may reverberate across the country. Yemen's already fragile economy and economic state cannot handle any further major shocks. In government-held areas, the value of the Yemen rial has deteriorated even further, reaching its lowest point in over 2 years at 1,514 rials against the dollar, eroding more than ever the purchasing power of the average family. We welcome the 30-day delay in implementing the designation, which has enabled consultations within the humanitarian community and the private sector to mitigate its potential impacts. More broadly, humanitarian organizations are putting in place business continuity plans and engaging with a broad set of actors on the ground to, of course, minimize the impact of regional tensions on the humanitarian response and on the people of Yemen. I echo the United Nations Secretary General's call for Security Council Resolution 2722 to be respected in its entirety and the need to avoid acts that could further worsen the situation in Yemen. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, as the possibility of a return to conflict and increased humanitarian needs grow, we must remember that Yemen is at the forefront of yet another crisis, the global climate crisis. It is the third most vulnerable country in the world to climate change and one of the least prepared for climate shocks. By 2060, the United Nations Development Programme predicts that extreme poverty could be more than 25% higher than it otherwise would be due to climate change. Climate-induced natural hazards are also already worsening the impacts of the annual rainy season, droughts, water scarcity, and desert locusts. Last year, heavy rains and flooding affected around 580,000 people and caused a reported 2,381 injuries and 47 deaths. Climate-related emergencies not only compound pre-existing risks, but also drive new needs. Over 3/4 of the people newly displaced in Yemen last year were displaced because of severe weather events. Climate change emergencies accelerate the humanitarian crisis by driving displacement and increasing protection concerns. They threaten the lives and livelihoods and well-being of households. The impact on girls and women who have more limited access to essential services and protection services can be particularly severe. However, Yemen will need much more international support to prepare for and mitigate the worst impact of the climate crisis. This includes adequate access to climate financing, assistance with streamlining national preparatory systems, and investment in climate-resilient development activities and initiatives. Madam President, let me end with 3 points. 2024 can still be the year Yemen turns the page on the tragedy and suffering stemming from years of conflict and economic deterioration. Second, we urge the Council to offer its full support to the humanitarian community in its ability to respond to the urgent crisis being experienced, help the people of Yemen transition towards self-sufficiency. And lastly, we further ask Council members to urge all involved to choose the path of de-escalation and peace. I thank you.
Ms. Wosornu for her briefing, and I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And let me start by thanking Special Envoy Grundberg and Director Wosornu for their timely briefings. We are very grateful to the Special Envoy for his timely visit to Yemen, including Aden and other cities, and also to other areas in the region. And we're cautiously encouraged to hear the support of parties for peace and very much welcome the flexibility set out in your approach. We therefore encourage the Council to continue to provide unwavering support to the UN Special Envoy during this process. We should work together to safeguard the gains that have been made and support further progress. And we emphasise the importance of the Yemeni parties continuing to engage constructively with the UN. As Hans said, the Yemeni people deserve nothing less than recovery and sustainable peace in Yemen. There is no military solution to this conflict. As Director Wosornu set out, the humanitarian situation is deteriorating and the needs for this year remain high, with 18.2 million people in need of assistance and with women and girls especially vulnerable. Yemen continues to be one of the most food insecure countries in the world. As we heard, the UN Humanitarian Response Plan for 2024 is a stark reminder of the dire humanitarian situation in Yemen. The plan aims to reach 11.2 million Yemenis most in need. The UK has committed over $110 million in humanitarian aid during this financial year, and we echo Director Wosornu's call to the international community to consider providing further funding towards the humanitarian response plan for Yemen. President, despite repeated calls to de-escalate, the Houthis have continued illegal and destabilising attacks in the Red Sea, disrupting maritime shipping and freedom of navigation in the region, and risking further regional escalation. The disruption to shipping in the Red Sea caused by Houthi attacks are, as we heard from Director Wosornu, driving up the costs of global shipping, including the costs of food supplies and humanitarian aid in the region. And these illegal and unjustified attacks risk exacerbating the humanitarian suffering in Yemen. And that is why we've taken necessary, proportionate and legal action in self-defence alongside the United States, with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands and New Zealand against targets tied to the Houthi attacks. In closing, President, let me underscore our commitment to the peace process in Yemen and to the Special Envoy's personal efforts to bring sustainable peace to the people of Yemen. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. On the outset, I also would like to thank Special Envoy Hans Grundberg and the Director of Operations and Advocacy Division of OCHA, Adam Wersernu, for their informative briefings. More than 1 month has now passed since this Council adopted Resolution 2722. Through this resolution, this Council strongly condemned attacks by the Houthis on commercial vessels and demanded an immediate halt to all such attacks. The Republic of Korea feels strongly in its positions that free navigation must be ensured in any case. Thus, we are greatly concerned by the threats and attacks against commercial vessels on the Red Sea by the Houthis. However, despite the consistent message of the international community, the Houthis have repeatedly committed attacks on commercial vessels, including the dangerous missile attacks on 2 ships just last week. These attacks are unacceptable and unjustifiable, regardless of any excuses. Resolution 2722 clearly notes the right of member states, in accordance with international law, to defend their vessels from attacks, including those that undermine navigational rights and freedoms. The Republic of Korea strongly urges the Houthis once again to stop any dangerous provocations. Madam President, the Yemeni people have faced acute sufferings over the last decades due to the seemingly never-ending conflict in the country. It is worrisome that, according to the Humanitarian Response Plan 2024, 18.2 million Yemenis, more than half of the entire population, are still in need of humanitarian assistance. It is also concerning that food insecurity and the adverse effects of climate changes are worsening the already dire humanitarian situation. Rather than further destabilizing the region through its groundless attacks in the Red Sea, the Houthis should instead focus on the ongoing struggles of the Yemeni people by cooperating with relevant parties, including the UN and other international organizations, to establish sustainable peace and development in Yemen. The Houthis must also heed the international calls for an improvement in the human rights situation in northern Yemen. My delegation firmly supports the current efforts by Special Envoy Grundberg to illuminate a brighter future in Yemen, despite this extremely difficult situation. In this connection, we believe that a permanent ceasefire in Yemen and the resumption of the Yemeni-led political process are essential, with a view towards ending the suffering of the Yemeni people. Thus, any military attempts inside Yemen should immediately cease, and meaningful engagement between the parties should resume. As such, the Republic of Korea fully supports a Yemeni-led political transition process with inclusive participation, including all of the previously marginalized groups such as women and youth. We also support the ongoing engagement by key regional countries, including Saudi Arabia and Oman, towards the realization of final agreements. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Je remercie Hans Grundberg ainsi que Adam Wersernu
for their briefings.
Et je salue la présence parmi nous du représentant du Yémen. Madame la Présidente, les Houthis doivent cesser leur action de déstabilisation en mer Rouge. La France renouvelle sa condamnation des attaques menées par les Houthis en mer Rouge et dans le golfe d'Aden contre des navires commerciaux, attaques qui se poursuivent comme indiqué dans le rapport du secrétaire général à ce sujet. Armées, les Houthis portent l'entière responsabilité de l'escalade. Et nous appelons les Houthis à y mettre fin, à libérer immédiatement le Galaxy Leader et son équipage, qui sont otages des Houthis depuis le 19 novembre 2023. La résolution 2722, adoptée par le Conseil de sécurité le 10 janvier dernier, rappelle que l'exercice des droits et libertés de navigation doit être respecté, que les États ont, en accord avec le droit international, le droit de défendre leurs navires contre les attaques. that in accordance with international law, states have the right to defend their vessels from attacks. That resolution must be fully respected and implemented. France will continue to shoulder its responsibilities and contribute to maritime safety in this region, along with our partners in the region, to prevent any escalation. We are already deploying military means under our national mandate, and we welcome the upcoming launch of the European Operation Aspides in the Red Sea. This is one contribution to maritime safety in the region. Madam President, the serious violations of international law committed by the Houthis in the Red Sea must not draw our attention away from the situation within Yemen. Given the rise in tensions in some governorates, the partial truce marked by incidents must become a cessation of complete and lasting cessation of hostilities. A lasting ceasefire will help improve the humanitarian situation. While almost half of the population is experiencing food insecurity, the humanitarian response must not suffer as a result of these tensions in the Red Sea. The Yemeni population, in particular in Houthi-controlled areas, are the frontline victims of tensions in the Red Sea, while humanitarian organizations are seeing rising costs. The Houthis are also continuing to undermine humanitarian access of our partners on the ground. Their responsibility in this worsening humanitarian situation in Yemen is clear. We must ensure the arrival of humanitarian aid gets to the civilian populations in Yemen at a reasonable cost. France supports the UN mechanisms working towards greater stability and security in Yemen, just as the UNVIM is doing, which is effectively combating arms trafficking in the Red Sea. This must be bolstered and better financed. France reiterates its full support for the Special Envoy in his efforts to define an inclusive roadmap. The peace process has been disrupted by the irresponsible behavior of the Houthis in the Red Sea, but we must pursue the roadmap put forward by the Special Envoy. France welcomes these efforts and is working towards that end with Saudi Arabia, Oman, as well as other regional actors. The Security Council must pursue its efforts to achieve a peace plan. This is the only path to ensuring a comprehensive and inclusive political solution which takes account of the concerns of and interests of all Yemenis. The full, equal, meaningful and effective participation of Yemeni women in the political negotiations must be guaranteed. France calls on the parties, first and foremost the Houthis, to act responsibly to achieve a political agreement with the new Yemeni Prime Minister, and we welcome this appointment.
Thank you. I thank the representative of France for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would like to start by thanking Special Envoy Hans Grundberg and Ms. Adam Osonu for their briefings. I also welcome the permanent representative of Yemen to this meeting. For some time now, parties concerned have stayed closely engaged on a political solution to the Yemeni issue, working vigorously to end the suffering of the Yemeni people. Yemen's political process has thus achieved some positive progress. China commends Special Envoy Grundberg, Yemeni parties and regional countries concerned for their endeavor. It is concerning, however, that the ongoing escalations in the Red Sea, in particular, the sustained military actions by certain countries against Yemen, have aggravated the security risks in the Red Sea area and dealt a heavy blow to Yemen's political process. We call on the Houthis to stop attacking commercial vessels. We also stress that this Council has never authorized any country to use force against Yemen. No country should distort or abuse international law and Security Council resolutions to instigate new tensions in the Red Sea. At this crucial moment, we hope Yemeni parties will put the people's interests first, demonstrate resolve, eliminate interference, and steadfastly advance the political process to its final victory. We support the Yemeni-owned and Yemeni-led principle in advancing the political process. We support the work of Special Envoy Grundberg in its continuous efforts, and we look forward to the continued constructive role by countries with major influence on the Yemeni situation. Yemen remains beset with one of the world's gravest humanitarian crises. Its people are in urgent need of food, drinking water, healthcare, and other basic necessities. China is highly concerned about the fragility on the humanitarian front. We call on the international community to increase humanitarian and development input in Yemen to effectively improve the humanitarian situation on the ground. Madam President, the political settlement of the Yemeni issue is closely linked to its regional environment. As we speak now, the Gaza conflict is spilling over, the Red Sea situation is escalating, and therefore the Middle East region sits on the verge of extreme danger. The pressing priority in front of us all is to push for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, to take tangible, effective, and responsible measures to prevent a further spread of the conflict to the wider region. The countries concerned, in particular, need to heed the strong appeals from the international community, especially countries and peoples in the region, cease and desist from obstructing the Council's actions, and genuinely joining the efforts to bring about an early ceasefire in Gaza. Alongside the rest of the international community, China stands ready to continue to work relentlessly towards the political settlement of the Yemeni issue and the maintenance of peace and stability in the Middle East. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель.
Признательны спецпосланнику генсекретаря по Йемену Хансу Грундбергу и директору КГБ по операциям Эдем Вассорну за доклады о политической и гуманитарной обстановке в этой стране. Мы могли бы, разумеется, сегодня в своем выступлении сосредоточиться, как и прежде, на внутриеменской повестке, перспективах урегулирования и итогах переговоров. Но, к сожалению, эти процессы осложнились новым деструктивным фактором, который невозможно игнорировать, а именно продолжающейся агрессией так называемой коалиции во главе с Соединенными Штатами и Великобританией при участии ряда их сателлитов в отношении суверенного Йемена. Начавшиеся 11 января массированные удары по территории этой ближневосточной страны продолжаются по сей день. Такие действия западных стран являются прямым нарушением международного права. Статья 51 Устава ООН, на которую они ссылаются, неприменима к ситуации с коммерческими судами. Право на самооборону не может задействоваться для обеспечения свободы судоходства, тем более, когда речь якобы идет о защите судов, следующих под флагом третьих стран. При этом никакой санкции Совета Безопасности ООН по главе 7 Устава о применении силы тоже не было. Недопустимо и извращенное толкование резолюции Совета Безопасности 2722, которое не дает никакого благословения на силовые действия в Йемене. Такой опасный подход, который Запад практикует все чаще, подрывает авторитет Совета Безопасности и всей Организации Объединенных Наций, ведет к разрушению всей архитектуры безопасности в глобальном масштабе. С сожалением констатируем, что Европейский Союз решил пойти по этому же порочному пути вслед за американцами и объявил о собственной так называемой оборонительной операции «Аспидес», которая, по заявлениям Брюсселя, начнет действовать уже 19 февраля, то есть со следующей недели. Хочу подчеркнуть, что Россия категорически осуждает нападения и перехваты коммерческих судов, а также любые шаги, препятствующие свободе мореплавания. Мы транслируем соответствующие сигналы руководству движения «Ансар-Аллах», побуждая их сосредоточиться на внутриеменской повестке и финализации соответствующих договоренностей. Однако сомнительные западные авантюры создают для внутриеменского процесса дополнительные риски, отнюдь не делая при этом судоходство в упомянутых акваториях более безопасным. Наоборот, деструктивные шаги Запада только способствуют дальнейшему расползанию хаоса в регионе.
chaos across the region. One would recall that the illegitimate and illegal attacks against Yemen have adverse consequences for the already complicated humanitarian situation in the country, which already continues to endure an acute shortage of medicine. According to UN estimates, of the $4.3 billion that was requested for 2023 to support Yemenis in need, only 39% was collected. If our US and British colleagues genuinely wish to help, then they should immediately end military activity against Yemen, and they should focus on providing meaningful assistance to ordinary people who live in that country. President, I cannot but recall the root causes of the situation that has transpired. I refer to Israel's brutal military operation in the Gaza Strip, which has provoked a chain reaction in the entire Middle East, including the Ansar Allah movement. An immediate ceasefire in Gaza will help to stabilize the situation in the Red Sea, and the de-escalation in those waters will in turn unblock the efforts of the Special Envoy, Mr. Grundberg, who has, under these circumstances, been forced to revert back to shuttle diplomacy instead of completing the work on the roadmap for inter-Yemeni settlement. Our support for your efforts, Mr. Grundberg, remains steadfast. We understand how complicated UN mediation is, given the short-sighted actions of our friends from the West, first and foremost the US and the UK, for effectively each new strike they carry out targeting Yemen results in another wave of escalation and further alienates prospects for normalization. Russia has been genuinely and sincerely striving to help the Yemeni people reach agreement against the backdrop of the US's aggressive actions and satellites' aggressive actions. We have redoubled our efforts to that end, and we engaged in contacts with Yemeni political forces and key regional partners to emphasize the need for prompt reaching of a long-term stabilization through inclusive inter-Yemeni dialogue under the aegis of the UN. We call on partners to maintain a focus on the peace process. We believe that all Yemeni stakeholders, including the Ansar Allah movement, ultimately are focused on maintaining and pursuing dialogue. But they need to not just be helped in this, but there's a need not to stand in their way, not to pose additional problems for Yemeni settlement through ill-conceived initiatives. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, Madam President, and I also thank Special Envoy Grundberg and Director Wasornu for their comprehensive briefings and also for your tireless efforts. Cognizant of mounting tensions in the region, it is of utmost importance that we remain dedicated to finding a political agreement that will lead to a sustainable peace. The establishment of a UN roadmap will be crucial to ensure the fulfillment of commitments made by parties in December. More specifically, these include the implementation of a nationwide ceasefire, improving living conditions, and engaging in preparations for the resumption of an inclusive Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under UN auspices. The humanitarian emergency in Yemen remains a critical concern for Malta. This must remain a priority for this Council. 9 years into this conflict, a staggering 18 million people need humanitarian assistance and protection services. We welcome the appointment of Julian Arnett as the UN Resident Coordinator in Yemen and thank his predecessor David Gressly for his dedicated service. The UN's Humanitarian Response Plan for 2024 is a lifeline for millions of Yemenis. We call on donors to support the UN in their efforts to deliver essential humanitarian aid. The food insecurity situation is equally worrying. Over 12 million people lack sufficient access to safe drinking water, resulting in an alarming increase in cholera and other infectious diseases. Chronic access impediments faced by humanitarian workers exacerbate the suffering for Yemeni civilians. We remind all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law. Restrictions to freedom of movement for women aid workers limit access to basic services among Yemen's most vulnerable. In this regard, we reiterate our call on the Houthis to lift the Mahram requirements with immediate effect. Madam President, nearly 2.5 million children are out of school. A further 8 million are at risk of leaving the education system due to the destruction and repurposing of school buildings and internal displacement. All parties must refrain from actions that impede access to education. They have the responsibility to safeguard, protect, respect, and promote the right to education in line with Resolution 2601. As we have heard today, Yemen is not only experiencing one of the world's worst humanitarian and development crises, it is also among the countries most vulnerable to climate change. This has been underscored by the damage and disruption caused by recent natural disasters, including excessive flooding. Malta reiterates its call for synergies to be met with concrete solutions, with a focus on strengthening early warning, anticipatory actions, and climate-resilient agriculture and food systems. Malta is also deeply concerned by the impact of recent escalations in the region and their implication for Yemen's roadmap to peace and the humanitarian situation. As recognized in Resolution 2722, the Houthis must immediately cease all attacks on commercial shipping. They must also release any personnel or vessels that are being detained. Furthermore, we reiterate that all member states defending their vessels must do so in accordance with international law. Malta calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and prioritize diplomatic channels so as not to further escalate the current situation. In conclusion, Madam President, the international community must safeguard the hard-won gains made towards peace in Yemen. We call on all parties to remain dedicated to agreeing to a UN roadmap for a formalized ceasefire and political process, and to guarantee the unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid. We must continue to support the people of Yemen and ensure that, after nearly a decade of conflict, their path to peace is protected. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Special Envoy Grundberg and Director Worsonu, for your briefings today. Let me also welcome Yemen's representative to this meeting. The United States also welcomes the Secretary General's report published last week on Houthi threats to maritime security. This reporting on Houthi attacks on merchant and commercial vessels in the Red Sea, as requested by Resolution 2722, makes clear the extent of this threat and the need for this Council to continue to demand that the Houthis cease their attacks. In response to attacks on U.S. naval vessels, the United States has taken necessary and proportionate measures in the exercise of its inherent right of self-defense, as described in letters provided to the Council on January 12, January 26, and February 6. As we indicated in our letters, these strikes, taken in self-defense, aim to disrupt and degrade the Houthis' ability to continue their reckless attacks against vessels and commercial shipping in the Red Sea, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden. It also bears repeating that the United States does not desire more conflict in the region. We call again on the Houthis to release the crew of the MV Galaxy Leader. It has been nearly 3 months since the Houthis took the 25-member crew and their ship hostage, and every day that their detention continues is unacceptable. Madam President, Iran cannot deny its role in enabling and supporting the attacks carried out by the Houthis, given Iran's long-term material support for and encouragement of the Houthis' destabilizing actions in the region. Since 2014, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has provided the Houthis a growing arsenal of advanced weapons that they have used to attack commercial shipping in the Red Sea. The provision of this materiel violates UN Security Council Resolutions 2140 and 2216. Between 2015 and 2023, the United States and its partners have interdicted at least 18 vessels illicitly smuggling weapons to the Houthis, seizing ballistic, cruise, and anti-ship missile components, UAVs, and other weapons. And just weeks ago, on January 11, while conducting a flag verification boarding, U.S. Navy forces interdicted a vessel illegally transporting advanced lethal aid, including advanced Iranian-manufactured ballistic and cruise missile components, from Iran to resupply Houthi militants in Yemen. We call again on every member state, and especially those with direct channels to Iran, to press Iran's leaders to rein in the Houthis and stop these lawless attacks and abide by their obligations under Security Council resolutions. The Houthis are trying to apply a chokehold on global shipping through the Red Sea. As a result, people around the world face increased costs for goods and supplies. Rerouting a ship around Africa adds roughly 10 days and $1 million in fuel costs for each one-way voyage between Asia and Europe. The Houthis also continue to lay siege to cities in Yemen and prevent the transfer of food, water, and humanitarian aid to civilian populations, laying bare the hypocrisy of their claims. Last month, the United States announced the designation of Ansar Allah, commonly known as the Houthis, as a specially designated global terrorist effective February 16. As the world's leading donor of humanitarian assistance for Yemen, we delayed the designation's effective date to consult with stakeholders on minimizing the impact these actions might have on the humanitarian situation. In addition to existing humanitarian carve-outs that mitigate the humanitarian impact on the Yemeni people, the United States also announced new general licenses to support continued access to essential goods and services in Yemen. The United States seeks to narrowly target the Houthis' terrorist activities while mitigating any humanitarian harm on the people of Yemen who deserve the chance for a better future. To that end, we congratulate His Excellency Ahmed bin Mubarak on his appointment as Yemen's Prime Minister and thank outgoing Prime Minister Abdul Malik for his service to the Yemeni people. We commend both for their sustained commitment to a UN-led Yemeni political process aimed at bringing the Yemen conflict to an end. It is important that any intra-Yemeni peace framework support not only dialogue between the Houthis and the government, but it include broad engagement with Yemeni civil society and other stakeholders. Their calls for justice, accountability, and redress for human rights abuses and violations must not only be heard, but also addressed. For this reason, we continue to call for the release of our own locally employed staff who have been detained by the Houthis in Sana'a for more than 2 years, and all others unjustly detained in Yemen. Above all, the United States remains committed to achieving lasting peace, stability, and prosperity for the Yemeni people. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you,
Et
President.
je remercie nos deux intervenantes et intervenants de leurs exposés et de leurs efforts inlassables qui incluent les visites récentes de l'envoyé spécial en faveur de la paix et de la protection des civils au Yémen. Je souhaite aussi la bienvenue aux représentants du Yémen ici au sein. Nous l'avons entendu, en ce début d'année, le Yémen se trouve une nouvelle fois à la croisée des chemins.
Yemen once again finds
Si
itself at a crossroads. Although the hope for a peaceful settlement is maintained, the recent regional dynamics have resulted in additional risks being posed. We all are aware that regional de-escalation would have a positive impact for Yemen. In the same way, lasting peace in Yemen would have a stabilizing effect throughout the region, including for stability in the Red Sea. This is why there is a critical need to preserve the gains of discussions underway. The parties need to fully engage in favor of an inclusive process under the aegis of the United Nations. In this regard, without a sustained commitment on the part of all stakeholders, including the meaningful, significant participation of women, peace proposals would be unattainable, and there would be no way to reach lasting security in the country, as was affirmed by Yasmin Al-Eryani from Sana'a Center last May at the Security Council. I quote, "Women, young people, and all segments of Yemeni society are entirely capable of rebuilding their country and shaping its future." Furthermore, Switzerland calls upon all parties to exercise caution and restraint, as well as to strictly respect international law and to redouble diplomatic efforts to that end. Another deterioration of the situation would have devastating human and economic consequences. We have seen this for ourselves. This recent decade of war has had a major impact on many sectors of Yemeni society, specifically in the field field of education. Yemeni civil society has clearly said that now millions of children carry guns instead of school bags. This situation is unacceptable. This is why we urge all stakeholders to implement their action plans to end and prevent grave violations against children. President, turning to the humanitarian situation, we recall that parties are obligated under international humanitarian law, obligated to authorize and facilitate the rapid, safe, and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance. In this regard, and we regularly and frequently emphasize this, humanitarian personnel are protected under IHL. They must be able to work independently of any question of nationality. Switzerland applauds the commitment of these women and men who work in one of the most difficult environments in the world. Their commitment helps to deliver vital assistance to millions of people. OCHA's Director of Operations and Advocacy has stressed that this assistance is essential given the particularly alarming level of food insecurity in Yemen. The Yemeni population is caught up in successive and cumulative crises, climate change being one of the most serious. Combined with conflict, the uptick in natural disasters has pushed people to leave their homes, thereby exacerbating the current humanitarian crisis. This is why there's a need not just to step up humanitarian assistance, but also to shore up early warning systems. And lastly, the structural shortage of water resources needs to be tackled. This requires political measures that reflect water-related challenges in order to prevent future water-related conflicts. President, this Council and countries in the region need to redouble efforts to contribute to an environment that is conducive to peace discussions and to address urgent humanitarian needs. In this context, we wish to reaffirm our full support to the Special Envoy Hans Grundberg. The Yemeni population can wait no longer. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And thank you also to our briefers today, to Special Envoy Grundberg and to Director Vosornu. I also congratulate Mr. Julian Harnis on his appointment as a regional coordinator. And as this is our first briefing on Yemen, I wish to extend Slovenia's full support for the work of your respective offices. I also want to welcome representative of Yemen to today's meeting. Madam President, I will begin today by addressing the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, one of the world's worst. This has been brought into sharp focus by the Humanitarian Needs Overview and Response Plan for 2024, published earlier this month. And as Director Vosornu have just informed us, Yemen remains one of the most food insecure countries, following years of conflict, displacement, and increasing effects of climate change, leading to droughts and flooding. The impact of the country's water scarcity on access to safe drinking water and adequate sanitation is alarming. And we are horrified that Yemeni children in particular are at daily risk of casualty from the landmines and other unexploded ordnance. All of this is compounded by a challenging humanitarian funding situation and precarious security environment for aid workers on the ground. I start by raising the issue today as, amidst broader regional conflagration, the suffering of the Yemeni people through 9 long years of war should not be overlooked or forgotten. The Yemeni people must remain our primary incentive for finding a solution to this protracted conflict. And for some time, this solution had appeared within reach. We welcomed the encouraging update from the Special Envoy, as announced in December, that the parties had made a commitment to reaching a ceasefire and developing a UN roadmap. It is disappointing, but not unexpected, that the deterioration situation across the region is affecting peace process in Yemen at the moment. We fully back continuing UN efforts towards translating the truce into a nationwide ceasefire respected by all parties. We recognize the need for inclusive intra-Yemeni dialogue and political settlement. And we stress the importance of underrepresented groups such as women and youth having a meaningful voice in this process. Slovenia welcomes your efforts, Special Envoy, to continue to engage with all stakeholders, now needed more than ever, and we encourage those with influence over the parties to use it wisely and to foster constructive dialogue. Madam President, last month we adopted Resolution 2722 condemning Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, which have regrettably continued. And I reiterate Slovenia's call for these attacks to cease. To conclude, Madam President, we urge the long overdue peace for the people of Yemen remain a top priority for all. We call for the Security Council to stay united in this endeavor, and we emphasize the need to prioritize diplomatic efforts first and foremost. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam.
Agradezco la información proporcionada por el enviado especial, señor Hans Grundberg, así como la directora de Operaciones y Promoción de la OCHA, señora Edem. También doy la bienvenida al representante de Yemen en esta reunión. Reitero el reconocimiento a la labor del enviado especial Grundberg para impulsar el proceso de diálogo basado en el compromiso con la democracia, la buena gobernanza y la reconciliación nacional en Yemen, y lo aliento a continuar con sus esfuerzos. Aprovecho para desearle éxito en el cumplimiento de sus funciones al nuevo coordinador residente y humanitario de las Naciones Unidas en Yemen, señor Julian Arnaiz. Señora Presidenta, a mi delegación le preocupa el impacto que la escalada de violencia en el Mar Rojo provocada por los ataques hutíes en contra de las embarcaciones comerciales puede tener en la concreción de una hoja de ruta para las negociaciones. Y consideramos que el diálogo político intra-yemení bajo los auspicios de las Naciones Unidas es el único camino viable hacia la paz sostenible en Yemen. El Ecuador reitera la necesidad de cumplir con la resolución 2722 y hace un llamado a los hutíes a que cesen sus actividades a las embarcaciones comerciales y liberen a todos los tripulantes que han sido retenidos. Luego de casi 9 años de guerra,
After almost 9 years of war, more than half the population of Yemen, that is 18.2 million people, require humanitarian assistance.
De acuerdo con el plan de respuesta humanitaria 2024 de la OCHA, demanda un presupuesto de $2.700 millones. Hoy más que nunca, la población yemení requiere el aporte de la comunidad internacional. Una mayor escalada del conflicto anularía la leve mejoría que la situación humanitaria en Yemen experimentó durante el año 2023 como resultado de la tregua. Los ataques producidos a las embarcaciones comerciales en el Mar Rojo han ocasionado un incremento en los precios de transporte y retraso en los envíos de bienes esenciales como combustibles y alimentos. Esta situación para Yemen propone un escenario con proyecciones que demuestran que la población experimentará niveles de inseguridad alimentaria aguda en áreas controladas por el gobierno de Yemen, incrementando del 41 al 45%, equivalente a 4,56 millones de personas. Por otra parte, las organizaciones humanitarias podrían verse obligadas a detener sus operaciones en áreas donde se han registrado hostilidades, afectando a poblaciones vulnerables que requieren de su asistencia. Mi país reitera el llamado del secretario general y del enviado especial para que las partes se abstengan de acciones que podrían resultar en un nuevo conflicto armado, el cual, a más de socavar el frágil proceso de paz y los limitados avances humanitarios, podría exacerbar también las tensiones regionales. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me begin by expressing our appreciation to Special Envoy Mr. Grundberg and OCHA Director Ms. Wasonu for their informative briefings. My appreciation also goes to the Secretariat and the International Maritime Organization for their preparation for the report in accordance with Resolution 2722. Today, I would like to focus on 3 issues: the ongoing crisis in the Red Sea, the peace process, and the humanitarian situation in Yemen. Madam President, We have been witnessing an extraordinary number of reports of the Houthis launching or attempting to launch missiles, drones, and other advanced weapons toward vessels in the Red Sea and its vicinity. The Houthis' continued threats to maritime security and navigational rights have led to a sharp decrease in trade via the Suez Canal, as the Secretary General recently informed the General Assembly. Now, many commercial ships are forced to take the more costly, energy-intensive, and time-consuming route around South Africa for their travel between Asia and Europe. Businesses around the world, including my country, have already experienced a negative real-life impact due to this disruption of global supply chains. I have voiced grave concern about this problem several times in this chamber, and the Security Council has unequivocally pronounced the same in Resolution 2722. But Japan once again condemns the Houthis' attacks and demands their immediate cessation. Likewise, we condemn the seizure of the Japanese-operated Galaxy Leader and demand the immediate release of the vessel and its 25 crew members, which the Houthis have been illegally holding for nearly 3 months. Madam President, moving to the Yemen's peace process, Japan commends the mediation efforts of the Special Envoy, and as well as the critical role played by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Sultanate of Oman, despite the current very difficult circumstances. Japan believes the political stability is essential for Yemen, as it will not only enhance the country's national security, but will also lay the foundation for improving the economic and humanitarian situation. We will continue to support the work of the Special Envoy and trust the UN roadmap he and his team are preparing will bring lasting peace in Yemen. Madam President, the people of Yemen have been suffering from a devastating humanitarian situation over 9 years of conflict. Japan is seriously concerned that delays as well as increased costs of imports due to the growing security risk in the Red Sea will only worsen their plight. Japan is also deeply concerned about the severe malnutrition and food shortages seen across the country. We sincerely hope that WFP can resume its vital operations as soon as possible. Given the current significant shortfall in humanitarian funding, Japan has recently decided to make an additional contribution of more than $18 million to Yemen in our most recent supplementary budget. This includes contribution of approximately $2 million to WFP to increase their ability to provide emergency food assistance to the most vulnerable people in Yemen. Japan remains committed to improving the humanitarian situation in Yemen. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Japan for his statement, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Guyana. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the members of the A3+, namely Algeria, Sierra Leone, Mozambique, and my country, Guyana. I want to welcome and thank UN Special Envoy Mr. Hans Grundberg and OCHA Director of Operations and Advocacy, Ms. Edem Wosernou, for their valuable briefings. We also welcome the participation of the representative of Yemen in this meeting. At the outset, the A3+ wishes to reiterate its strong commitment to the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Yemen. The A3+ recognizes the positive engagement and commitment of the government of Yemen to the international and regional efforts to end the conflict and resume the political process under the auspices of the UN. The situation in Yemen requires collective effort to consolidate the commitment and support from the United Nations system and regional actors in the pursuit of a comprehensive and lasting peace. In this vein, we welcome the appointment of Ms. Julian Harness as the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Yemen and the new Humanitarian Coordinator in the country. The people of Yemen deserve peace, security, and stability in advancing their political and economic future. The facilitating role of the UN Special Envoy and the efforts made by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, aiming to facilitate the resumption of an intra-Yemeni political process under the auspices of the United Nations, is vital to ensure an inclusive political process in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions. We therefore welcome and express our full support for his ongoing consultations with all relevant parties and stakeholders as part of the framework for a comprehensive peace process. The A3+ wishes to stress the importance of preserving the recent commitments announced by the parties in December 2023 and the ongoing discussions around a UN roadmap that would operationalize a nationwide ceasefire, resume an inclusive political process under UN auspices, and address key priorities for the benefit of the Yemeni people. Further, we stress the importance for the parties to provide the space for the full, effective, and meaningful participation of Yemeni women and civil society in all stages of the peace process, noting their long demonstrated willingness and capacity to engage in national efforts at all levels to resolve the conflict. The A3+ call upon the Houthis to adhere to the peace process in the country and sustain the goal of maintaining a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire in the country. Maintaining a comprehensive ceasefire built on the truce of April 2022 would stimulate and bring sanity to the peace process itself and other relevant layers complementary to the peace process. In this vein, we urge the Houthis to cease hostilities and to refrain from threatening commercial vessels and endangering international navigation and innocent lives. After 9 years of conflict, the humanitarian needs in Yemen remain immense. A political agreement leading to sustainable peace is the only long-term solution to the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. The A3+ expresses its deepest concern over this worsening humanitarian situation in the country, seriously affecting women and children. The conflict has impacted humanitarian relief and destroyed critical civilian infrastructure, such as hospitals, schools, and health clinics, while inflicting death on many. We call on the responsible parties to remove the barriers affecting humanitarian aid flows and the ability of humanitarian workers to perform their duties. We note that 18.2 million Yemeni people will need humanitarian assistance and protection services in 2024, with 17.6 million facing food and nutrition insecurity. In this vein, we would welcome the resumption of food supplies to the country by the World Food Programme and call on all the parties concerned to support WFP in this endeavour. The A3+ stresses that the parties have a legal obligation to ensure that humanitarian personnel are allowed to carry out their work unhindered and free from harm. Hostage-taking and other threats to their existence and ability to effectively carry out their duties, including by denying their freedom of movement, must cease. We strongly call for the release of all humanitarian workers and for an immediate end to all forms of intimidation employed to discourage them from carrying out their vital work. The crisis in Yemen has raged on for too long, tearing apart the fabric of the nation. On one side, forces loyal to the internationally recognized government fight to maintain order, while on the other, Houthi challenge this authority, controlling significant swaths of territory, including the capital, Sana'a. This relentless conflict has left behind a trail of destruction, displacement, and despair. We wish to spotlight the urgent need for funding in support of the humanitarian operations. It is concerning to us that the humanitarian funding portfolio has yet to achieve its desired target. We therefore call on international partners and donors to make meaningful contributions to the fund. The support from member states will sustain the lives of millions of Yemenis who are in need. Funding must also go beyond humanitarian assistance to include the development programs in Yemen. Together, we can continue to support the resilient people of Yemen and take decisive steps towards resolving what remains one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The continued deterioration and downward trend of the situation in Yemen, including the humanitarian crisis, the staggering economic conditions, together with the actions perpetrated by the Houthis, must be addressed. We urge the Houthis to refrain from using arbitrary measures that could exacerbate the suffering of the population. The A3+ expressed concern over the growing escalation of the use of force in the region in a situation that is already volatile. The continued attacks on Yemeni soil will affect humanitarian aid and further worsen the security situation in the country. The spate of airstrikes risk endangering the peace talks and the renewed commitment made by the parties. We urge due caution in avoiding any action that could undermine or derail the efforts of the Special Envoy toward the goal of achieving comprehensive and lasting peace in Yemen. We urge all involved to exercise maximum restraint and to prioritize diplomatic channels over military options and call for de-escalation. It is imperative to underscore that the Middle East region is at a crossroad with the current situation in Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria escalating to a point where regional spillover from the conflict in Gaza could become a reality. It is prudent for all parties to exercise restraint and abstain from further escalating tensions. A wider regional conflagration in the immediate circumstance must be prevented by all means necessary, and diplomatic efforts in resolving this situation should be ramped up. We urge for maximum restraint and urgent steps for the de-escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Further, we reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, which is of paramount importance to ensure regional stability. The stability and security in the region must be of utmost priority. The root causes of the conflict in the region need to be addressed, and all efforts in this regard must be pursued with equal attention, dedication, and commitment. We must use all existing diplomatic tools and mediation processes to secure the release of hostages and all civilians who remain in captivity and collectively achieve a humanitarian ceasefire to end the conflict in Gaza. The A3+ reiterates its support for an inclusive, nationally led and owned political process under the auspices of the United Nations with the clear goal of reaching a lasting and comprehensive peace in Yemen. We reaffirm our strong support and commitment to the work of the United Nations Special Envoy and the good offices of the UN Secretary General and the efforts made by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, aiming to facilitate the resumption of an intra-Yemeni political process in attaining security, stability, and lasting peace in Yemen. I thank you. I now resume my role as the President of the Council, and I will now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
اسمحوا لي السيد الرئيس في البداية أن أتقدم إليكم بالتهنئة
with a word of gratitude to you and congratulations on your presidency during this month. We wish you every success in your duties. I also wish to thank your predecessor, the permanent representative of France, for the successful presidency of the Security Council during the last month. I wish to take this opportunity to congratulate the new elected members of the Security Council. I thank Mr. Grundberg as well as Madam Vosornou for their briefings. Madam President, peace is the reason for our presence here. However, peace is something which has eluded us in the current Yemeni political landscape, and I'm talking about peace in all of its dimensions. Wars and conflicts have been devastating the country and society, and peace creates security, stability, and development. Today, the building of peace in Yemen is a prerequisite. This is where the interests of Yemen, the region, and the world reside. The Presidential Leadership Council and government once again emphasizes the need for the Yemeni people to achieve peace, justice, equality, and development. Our goal at present is to endeavor to embrace this option, to achieve this, which is in the interest of our people. There's a need to turn the page of devastating wars and conflict to achieve a comprehensive peace. We are open to
to all initiatives and good offices
geared towards achieving a lasting peace, a comprehensive peace on the basis of an agreed-upon political solution. I'm talking about the Gulf Initiative and the executive mechanism thereof, as well as the outcomes of the National Dialogue Conference, as well as relevant Security Council resolutions, first and foremost, Resolution 2216. We support the regional international efforts and the efforts of the Special Envoy. We applaud the unstinting efforts of our brothers in Saudi Arabia, this fraternal kingdom, their efforts to generate new life for the political process under the leadership of the United Nations, to settle the crisis in Yemen and to achieve peace and to restore security and stability in Yemen, as well as to alleviate the suffering endured by the Yemeni people. These efforts are coming up against the refusal and intransigence of the Houthi militias. This is compounded by military escalation at various fronts in the shadow of a tenuous truce that was not respected by these militias. The militias did not respect the provisions of the truce, this includes the unjust siege of the city of Taiz and failure to comply with the commitment to open up the roads. This was the reason behind the suffering of people. More than 4 million residents in that city. This siege is a reflection of the policy of collective punishment. It constitutes a war crime, and this is an egregious challenge in the face of the invitations of the international community and the Security Council, invitations to end the war and to resume political dialogue. Madam President, there has been escalation that the Houthis have undertaken in the Red Sea. This is nothing new. His Excellency, Mr. Rashad Mohammed Al-Alimi, the President of the Presidential Leadership Council, during the sessions of the General Assembly, and for a long time has warned against these measures. Likewise, for the Yemeni government, on a number of occasions, the Yemeni government warned against the dangerous ongoing control by Iran-backed militias of the Red Sea ports, as well as the threats this poses to international navigation, in addition to the repeated warnings in the report of the Group of Experts on Yemen Sanctions Committee. Warnings about Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. There is plentiful evidence about the aggressions and attacks by the Houthis. Unfortunately, these warnings fell on deaf ears within the international community. The escalation, which we are bearing witness to, is unfortunate, with the ongoing delivery of weapons from Iran to Houthi militias and the risks that this poses to international regional peace. And this will continue to escalate the crisis in Yemen and to worsen the humanitarian crisis. We reaffirm our government's sovereign right to protect territorial borders and to advance security and stability in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, as well as in the region. This is only possible with support provided to the Yemeni government to ensure that its capacity is built to secure international maritime trade. There's a need to restore ownership of institutions and restore our authority through all of our national soil, including cities and ports, which are now being used as launching pads to threaten safety and security of international navigation. Our government has notes that Houthis bear responsibility for the propaganda and false allegations. These have nothing to do with the just Palestinian cause. These measures are a reminder of the fact that some of the policies that the international community has adopted, policies vis-à-vis settling the Yemeni crisis, have contributed to reinforcing these militias' control and has encouraged them to continue their acts of aggression which constitute threats to peace, security, and regional and international stability. We wish to call upon the international community once again to adopt a realistic approach, to call upon the international community to correct the false narratives and to reverse the approach that was adopted vis-a-vis the current situation in Yemen and to provide for a shift in the approach. We applaud the decision taken by the United States of America, the decision taken to inscribe the Houthi militias on the group of global terrorist groups. We call for this categorization to be taken into account in order to end their violations and to end the crimes they perpetrate against the Yemeni people, so that these militias abandon violence, abandon terrorist initiatives, and so that they no longer pose a threat to regional and Yemeni peace and security. The recent escalation in the Red Sea has economic and humanitarian consequences that will continue. This includes the increase in the economic and humanitarian burden. This has been undermining the sovereignty and interests of the Yemeni people. There have been increases in the cost of maritime goods and insurance, and this results in an increase in food product crisis for people who have been enduring one of the most dire humanitarian crises. 80% of the needs of the region is under the control of Houthi militias, and these depend largely on the import of food through Hodeidah port and the Red Sea. We caution against the continuation of these attacks, which are liable to result in an almost complete halt to global trade in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Red Sea, which would end import-export operations and would have repercussions for the devastating humanitarian situation and the means of subsistence of the Yemeni people. Our government has been working towards the implementation of a number of economic and financial reforms, and we've been doing this with support from our brothers, friends, and partners developed in the area of development to facilitate these reforms and to contribute to improvements in the economic situation and to limit the humanitarian and economic fallout from the escalation which the Houthi militias have been carrying out and their seizure of vital port and oil infrastructure. We reaffirm that they have been targeting key port infrastructure. This has been undermining oil re-export operations for more than 1.5 years as a result of these attacks perpetrated by the Houthi militias. And these attacks strip the Yemeni people from access to key resources. This affects the state budget, and the government has been unable to deliver basic, essential services to people, including the payment of services and foreign currency, and this has generated pressure for the exchange rate of the national currency, and this has also had economic and humanitarian repercussions which have been catastrophic. This is a policy which consists of starving the people. There is an economic war that has been waged by the Houthi militias against the Yemeni people. We can no longer remain silent. The Yemeni government calls upon the international community to provide it with assistance to find ways to re-export oil. This is a vital resource which is of crucial significance for us to be able to comply with our obligations and commitments. Our government once again calls upon international humanitarian organizations, including UN agencies, to transfer the money provided to Yemen through the Central Yemeni Bank to the temporary capital in Adan in order to facilitate stability of the national currency and to support the economy as well as to shore up food stocks. We support the economic and financial support of our brothers in Saudi Arabia, as well as the United Arab Emirates. Their efforts to shore up the efforts undertaken by the Yemeni government to implement these plans and to tackle economic challenges. This is in addition to their humanitarian operations and the implementation of a number of projects in the area of development, which have contributed to easing the suffering of the population. We are deeply grateful to our friends in Saudi Arabia for the transfer of the second payment of $250 million to support the state budget and to support the efforts of the government to honor its commitments. President, our government has been supporting and stands in solidarity with the community of humanitarian agents against the arbitrary measures undertaken by the Houthi militias. They have sent UN personnel and humanitarian personnel, including US and British nationals. They have been expelled. These are immoral measures which add to the flagrant toll of violations of freedom of humanitarian work. The Presidential Leadership Council and our government reaffirms that we will provide all facilities and guarantees for the work of global organizations and humanitarian assistance organizations working in the temporary capital, Aden, in order to enhance their presence and to facilitate humanitarian operations in the various governorates of Yemen without conditions and without constraints. The escalation in the Red Sea and terrorist operations that have resulted in the suspension of the UNDP plan, the suspension of the rescue operation for the Safar tanker, and these operations will resume once security circumstances are stabilized in the Red Sea. The state of the Safar tanker is perilous, and despite the success that was achieved and progress in the implementation of the first step of the UN plan and the transfer of more than 1,450,000,000 crude oil to another tanker, there are other fears that persist regarding the remaining amounts in very dangerous areas which are under the control of lawless militias. These circumstances have created financial and operational challenges when it comes to the implementation of the rescue operation. There's a need to avoid disaster. The Presidential Leadership Council reaffirms its consistent position in support of the struggle of the Palestinian people and its just cause. We most firmly condemn the unjust Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip and occupied West Bank. We call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to guarantee protection of civilians and to save lives, including lives of children and of women who have been enduring a daily hellscape in Gaza, and we call for facilitation of sustained unimpeded humanitarian access for protection provided to the Palestinian people against this criminal operation. We firmly condemn the displacement of Palestinians from their land. We firmly condemn and reject the statements from the Prime Minister of the government of occupation in Israel vis-à-vis the plans to continue the Israeli aggression and attacks and incursions in the city of Rafah in south of Gaza, the purpose of which is to continue to indiscriminately kill the Palestinian people to ensure first displacement, ethnic cleansing, and the crime of genocide being carried out. The purpose is to expel hundreds of thousands of Gazans in flagrant violation of IHL and human rights. This is a dangerous escalation of the situation and will have catastrophic consequences in security and stability in the region. We call the Security Council to honor its commitments and to shoulder its responsibility to halt this aggression and crimes against the Palestinian people, who are largely women and children. These are daily violations in deafening international silence. If the international community and the Security Council fail to adopt measures now, at a time when these crimes continue to be carried out by the Israeli occupying powers, when will they do this to uphold their principles and their credibility? We affirm that a fair and lasting peace in the region can only be achieved when the Palestinian people are able to exercise their inalienable rights and when they are able to create their independent sovereign state within the 4 June 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital, in line with resolutions, international law, and the Arab Peace Initiative, and to recognize a Palestinian state. Without this solution, there will be neither peace nor stability in the region. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Yemen for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.